I'd been driving for Lyft for years, mostly sticking to the late-night shifts. The roads were quieter, the tips were better, but there was always a trade-off. Every now and then you'd pick up someone whose presence didn't just fade once the ride was over, it lingered, and that feeling didn't fade for days. I thought I was a careful driver. Sure, I'd dealt with my fair share of strange passengers, but nothing ever even came close to what happened that night. I didn't have a dash cam back then. Big mistake. That night changed everything. It started like any other shift. I was driving my 2005 Volvo, old but reliable, and the streets were empty, as if the city itself had fallen asleep. I liked it that way. Around 2 a.m. I got a request from a convenience store just up the street. No big deal. I thought, this'll be an easy one. But as I pulled up, my gut twisted. You know that feeling you get when something's off, but you can't quite place it? That's what I felt. It was almost like the store itself was breathing, a strange, oppressive air hanging over it. The lights were off, the parking lot was empty, and the usual bustle of a 24-hour store was gone. Silence, thick and unsettling. Then I saw him, a man pacing outside the store. His hoodie was ragged, the kind you know hasn't seen a wash in years. His movements were jerky, frantic, like he couldn't stand still, as though something invisible was pulling him in every direction. Every few steps, he would glance over his shoulder, eyes darting like prey, scanning the shadows. I felt it then, my gut twisting again, that gut-deep instinct that something was horribly wrong. I thought about cancelling the ride. I really did, but loneliness won out. Maybe it was the fact that it was 2 a.m. Maybe it was that I was tired, desperate for a good fare. But I unlocked the doors anyway. He slid in without a word. His presence felt like a weight on my chest as soon as he sat down, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I put the car in drive, but the regret hit me immediately. It's a strange thing when someone looks at you with those wide, unblinking eyes. It's a kind of stillness, unnatural. He didn't look like a person, not fully. There was something inhuman about the way he watched me through the rearview mirror, something cold and detached. I tried to break the silence with the radio, turning the knob, but the second the music started, he snapped. "Turn it off," he growled. His voice was low, rough, like gravel being scraped against stone. I didn't argue. I shut the radio off, my palms suddenly sweaty, my grip tightening on the wheel. The night was now suffocating. He didn't look away. His eyes didn't blink. They stayed locked on me, and the silence became unbearable. Minutes passed. It felt like hours. My heart pounded, my breath shallow. I wanted to scream at him to stop looking at me, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, he spoke. "Ever picked up someone you shouldn't have?" His voice was barely a whisper, like he was testing me. I froze, the question hanging in the air. My breath hitched in my throat. I forced out a laugh. Well, I hope not. But he didn't laugh. His eyes didn't flicker. He didn't react at all. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, as if settling in for a long story. His lips parted, and he muttered something low, almost inaudible. My mind raced to catch the words, but all I heard was the odd slur in his voice. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile, not at all. It spread across his face like a snake coiling. It was slow, deliberate, as if he were enjoying my discomfort. That was when I knew he was enjoying this, enjoying my fear. He started talking about how he used to be an Uber driver, a quick, almost dismissive story about how he'd quit after some punks robbed him. But the more he spoke, the less it seemed like a story. His words started to lose meaning, slurring together. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. His eyes were still fixed on me, and the smile never wavered. "It's funny," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." I felt the cold trickle of dread creep up my spine. I wanted to reach for my phone, to send a quick message, but I couldn't take my eyes off the road. The car felt smaller now. I felt trapped, like I was in a cage with a predator that was just waiting for the right moment to strike. He leaned in, his breath heavy with the smell of something foul, sour, like decay. His lips barely moved as he spoke. "I didn't mean it," he muttered to himself. I never meant it, but they deserved it. They all deserved it. My blood ran cold. Who was he talking about? I didn't want to know, but it felt like I couldn't escape the words. It was like they were pulling me down into some kind of madness. Was he a killer? Was this all some kind of sick game? As I neared his stop, he suddenly shouted, "You missed the turn!" His voice cracked, wild and high-pitched, the sound echoing in the confined space. My heart slammed against my chest, and I glanced at the GPS. We hadn't missed anything, but fear had taken hold of me. I slammed on the brakes. "Pull over!" he demanded. There was something in his tone now, something dark, something like a command. I pulled over, my hands trembling, sweat trickling down my neck. I couldn't breathe. I just wanted him out of my car. I wanted this nightmare to end. But then the headlights, a police car. I almost couldn't believe it. A sense of relief washed over me, but just as quickly, it was replaced by dread. The cop car passed us slowly. The spotlight from the cruiser flickered over the Volvo, but the man in the back seat? He didn't move. He slumped low in his seat like he was trying to hide. I froze. I didn't dare look in the mirror, but I could feel his eyes. They were on me, sharp and predatory. Then something strange happened. The cop car passed, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was safe, maybe nothing would happen. But when I turned to look in the rearview mirror, I saw him. His eyes were closed, his face calm, too calm. For a long moment he didn't move, and I wondered if he was waiting for something. Finally, he opened his eyes. His smile returned. Twisted, empty. "You got lucky," he muttered before flinging open the door and slipping out into the darkness without another word. I didn't even watch him leave. I couldn't. I just put the car in drive and fled, the engine growling under my hands like an animal trying to escape the hunter. I cut my shift short that night. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about anything except getting away. Weeks later, I saw the news. A robbery at the convenience store, the one where I'd picked him up. The police said the suspect was still on the loose. I felt sick. That man, that thing, had been right next to me. I'd narrowly avoided death. I thought about calling the cops, but then I wondered, would they even believe me? Would they care? One thing was certain, though. I would never again trust my gut when I felt that cold weight in the air. I would never pick up a passenger without wondering if I was making a deadly mistake. That night changed everything. It taught me that some people, some things, are better left in the dark, and I would never be the same.